My name's Oliver Lewis. I'm Insights Director at Conversphere, and I'm going to talk about our experiences in finding cultural insights from social, whether they were accidental, serendipitous, or purposeful, and how we've used what we've learned to help us find more, but also guard against false flags. So I'm going to run through a very quick intro as to who we are, spend a little time talking about culture and the difficulties we face as social researchers in making sense of it all, and then share some adaptations we've made as a result, all using some illustrative real-life examples. By way of introduction, we're a market research agency specializing in the use of social and digital data. We work across any market using any combination of technology and a large network of local researchers who are all situated in market and therefore immersed in the cultures and nuances of the language they work in. We deal with social first, but augment it where required with other forms of research, often supplied by our agency clients and agency partners. Now, I took a break from reading Mr. Nice again. That was a British comedy cultural reference. Write it in the comments if you got it or recognized it. But I found a good definition of culture comes from Sapiens, and it really nicely illustrates how we as social data researchers need to frame how we interpret the data in terms of understanding how people are thinking. What can we learn from behavior? And that behavior can come from claimed, from what people write, and observable from the images and videos that they share. And how do they articulate want and the motivations behind these desires? Then the last point about change being fueled by interactions is really very relevant, because social media, technology, and all the kerfuffle that goes with it is accelerating these interactions. It is connecting people more at an unprecedented scale, transporting ideas across the globe in moments and creating an always-on cultural exchange system, as Giles Crouch describes it. Now, I'm trying desperately hard not to sound like I'm whinging about how hard it is nowadays. As the birth of the concept of VUCA in the 80s shows, it's probably all relative. But things have very quickly become really challenging to navigate. There's a fog of misinformation, propaganda bots, deep fake issues, and AI-driven developments that make it a very challenging world for people to navigate, and signals for us as researchers to distill. But I suppose at least we have, via the plethora of social analytics tools, the means of tracking what's going on within that storm. As culture is kind of manifest in social, we have found pretty well in any cross-market study across any of the applications of social data, be that prevent, benchmark, measure, predict, and influence, there is always a difference that is hard to explain or rationalize. Conversely, very often where there are more contradictions at play, more interference and uncertainty, usually at the forefront of all of that dynamic, that's where we often find the best insights. So how can we ensure that we're sensitive to it all and guard against all of the interferences that we're studying? Now, anyone who's done any work on social analytics will know how raw results can be shaped by technological issues related to coverage, sampling, and so on. And that's before we get to researcher skills and sort of interpretive considerations. In our world, things can go belly up due to a missing and in a 10,000 character Boolean string. So our methods need to adapt to this maelstrom. And contrary to what many of the technologies and tools out there will tell you, there is no silver bullet. And just to preface the ensuing content, I'm not presenting a how-to guide here. I wouldn't be so churlish in the company of experts. But there follows some general adaptations that we made to help us along the way. So there are three things we started doing more of, mostly by design, to surface and also validate insights as genuinely culturally driven. The first is empathy, empathy with what's being witnessed, seen, read, and heard, and also empathizing with the broader reasons why these trends or circumstances could be occurring. Now, empathy is facilitated by a range of things, the main ones which being employing local researchers together, consulting with territory experts, educating the wider team, and where possible, applying a steep checklist to results. The next is data, where we try and quantify the significance of any trends by various methods available to us, from sophisticated AI to good old-fashioned manual coding. And we also seek validation through the application of multiple sources. And then finally, depth. And this is where we study subcultures and the people who comprise them. We bring the real world, whatever that is, into play. Where possible, we need to experience the topic that we're researching. Now I'm going to start with local researchers. And it's not easy having people dotted about the globe. There are lots of communication occurring via email, shared documents, etc. When we found ourselves sort of losing the art of conversation and probably missing out on really valuable insights. So we now, as a policy, have everyone talk, collaborate face-to-face, load up with coffee or Pro Plus, depending on the time zone, and chat through results. And it was just a casual remark in one of these sessions which surfaced this observation during a study on the use of functional wellness beverages. So we found a very rich seam of content on TikTok in which consumers were creating healthy homemade shakes and smoothies for a range of ailments, both reactively and proactively. A superficial view of all the data showed TikTok users making similar recommendations in terms of ingredients and sharing kind of how to make these. But we found that the US content featured very detailed forensic descriptions of how to make these solutions, as well as the benefits of the drinks for the consumer, going into great detail in that respect. Conversely, the Japanese content delivery style lent much more heavily on the poster as evidence of the benefits, and they were lacking that forensic detail. Now, there are obviously multiple implications for communications planning from the client, from the choice of influencer to the own content style and so on. The second example, and the reason why we need to use experts in their field, is that when we were mapping language use in African markets to help a client plan their content and resourcing, we used expert linguists to identify and explain the results. Now, whereas advanced language detection tools told us that English and Swahili were the dominant languages used in Kenyan social media, these actually failed to identify Sheng as an emergent hybrid language, which we found comprised a fifth of all social conversations once we manually appraised the data. Now, this was a really big alert for us, showing the dangers of reliance on AI in this case. And it also led to some serious thinking for the client and how they should adapt their tone of voice. Should they adopt this language in their communications? Is it an opportunity to sound more authentic? Or would it be more like having your uncle trying to be cool? There's a lot to consider for the clients as a result of this identification. Now, the linguist who supported us in this also attributed the dominance of English across a number of African countries, partly to wannabe influencers, initiating its use in an effort to appeal to a wider global audience. She actually foresaw the gradual erosion of native languages as a function of more widespread social media usage. Now, awareness of and sensitivity to cultural trends in our work is crucial. So we also encourage our diverse team to write and teach one another about their own cultures and write frequent blog posts on the topic. This, in turn, improves the outputs in multi-market studies. Now, finally, we apply the STEEP framework, which is predominantly used in trend prediction. And for those of you unfamiliar, it suggests 5 forces shape trends in any given market or culture, be they social, technological, environmental, economic, or political. Now, it's really helpful when we are confronted by results we struggle to rationalize or explain. The following example is not one of those, but it was just done just to see, really. But I think it illustrates the application of STEEP really nicely. Now, hopefully this will work. These are dotted all over social, and at least in my mind, I'm pretty sure the fault here lies with the car, but see what you think. Ouch. But not according to the UK. We analysed 300 responses to such videos and found the following results really intriguing. And yes, this sort of content can really attract a certain type of person to post, but that consideration notwithstanding, are our perceptions in the UK so very different? Are we more bloodthirsty as a people? I don't believe so. But when we think in terms of STEEP, there are unquestionably some social, environmental, and significant political forces at play that help explain these differences. The Netherlands has an environmental infrastructure that places equal billing to cyclists and cars and creates safe spaces where they don't interact in such a manner. France has a deep emotional connection with cycling, while in the UK, we see extensive coverage currently of a culture war being waged at policy level, empowering and arguably fostering aggressive behaviours and sentiment. Now, if we report on a cultural nuance, it sits much better if we can quantify it. We want to see that it's of a level of significance that justifies a different approach for that market or audience for our clients. And that is done in two ways, by quantifying and also multiple source validation. Now, our brief in this case was to explore the differences in preferences among different ethnic and LGBTQ+ groups in the US in terms of their skincare preferences. The ultimate objective for the client was to inform product development or even acquisition of smaller companies that had a strong footprint in each consumer group. For this, we used data from a company called Social Standards, who position themselves as kind of the till roll providers of the social media world. They capture and code Instagram posts according to a highly granular framework, noting the name of the brand or product mentioned, followed by its ingredients, its promises, and claimed functionality of that product. This data is then cross-tabulated against the poster's demographic details, all aggregated to a level to allow some quite rigorous quantitative analysis of the data. Now, using their data, we were able to show significant differences between product and ingredient choices among Asian and Hispanic consumers in the US. For want of a better word, we saw distinct preferences for native ingredients in the skincare purchasing habits. And we did follow this up with some social listening and found signals in that data corroborating these findings, giving us confidence to report these trends to the client. Conversely, this slide illustrates the dangers of reliance on one source, in this case, social. Looking at the main topics that Nigerian students discuss when considering study abroad, the ins and outs of the tortuous application process didn't appear at all in the social conversation, which was really very different to what we saw in China, where people relied heavily on peer advice to overcome this kind of hurdle in this process. However, when we looked to confirm this using search, we found it was actually the second most searched term in Nigeria. Conversely, only looking at search data would lead one to believe financial considerations were not as important to Nigerian prospective students, but social sees that as the primary issue. Now, interestingly enough, a third source, which was survey, saw results much more analogous with the social findings. But this really illustrates the importance, in our world at least, of using various sources to validate initial findings, triangulating where possible, where the applications of steep yields no satisfactory answers or hypotheses. The final consideration is depth, by which I mean exploring the subcultures and the people influencing them, and also venturing out of the digital world and actually going to experience things in person, physically. Scary stuff. Now I'm going to show snippets of a study into the world of extreme sports at the grassroots rather than the more manicured sort of branded world we tend to see. This work was commissioned by a small beverage manufacturer looking for a fresh angle to penetrate that sort of grassroots market. Excuse me. To do this, we identified around 1,000 of the most vocal social accounts within the extreme sports world and tracked their content over a period of time. This is very much a snippet, but we saw an amazing fusion of disciplines, people boarding down volcanoes, canoeing to a waterfall and jumping off them, BMX with ice wheels, and so on and so forth. And all of this, however kind of bonkers it may seem, also felt kind of predictable to us. So we needed to go deeper and look at the sort of the lighter signals beyond all of this top line findings. And within these weaker signals, we were able to show how this community was also really heavily engaged in social well-being on one side and the arts weren't just all about graffiti. So it's not all about the next big thing and ways of hurting yourself, but it's also about providing opportunities for children, promoting healthy lifestyles, and actually taking a more artistic slant is a really nice way of engaging people at the grassroots level. And finally, while our world is kind of digital, we also need to leave the house occasionally. Before pitching for an audience segmentation and profiling project for the Swiss Ice Hockey Federation, we traveled to a game. We watched the crowd as much as the game or sort of fight that was occurring on the rink, and noticed the dearth of national kit in the crowd, remarking how people were watching tended to wear their local team's colours, not those of the national team. This observation, as it transpired, was a key issue for the Federation. And in a country with like 4 languages, all bordered on all sides, the primary allegiance was with their regional local teams for most people. And it was with this insight that we developed the content strategy and segmentation based on degrees of support for the national team, identifying targets accordingly and showing how to engage the hardcore regional fans with the right kind of content that would and people that would bring them closer to the national team. So in conclusion, and with the utmost respect for all of you knowledgeable professionals, here are the things that we've learned when tasked with uncovering cultural insights. Consider Always On as a means of tracking microshifts. As we saw, culture is changing at a stupendous rate, and we need to use this technology that are available to us to identify the smaller shifts that are occurring. Experience trumps conjecture all times when you can. Count when you can. Seek multiple proof points from different sources, and don't be scared of getting into the weeds and really going granular into some of these trends or signals, because they can yield really valuable insights. Thank you very much.